Welcome back. So if you're the kind of person who loves to dig deep, to really understand the profound structures of ancient texts, and, more importantly, see how they apply to our own deeply relatable human condition, well, you're in exactly the right place today. We're diving into an explainer of Psalm 39. It's this incredible, ancient poetic text that tackles some seriously heavy, universal themes. We're talking silence, mortality, and just the overall fleeting nature of our existence.
Okay, let's jump right in with a question. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely overwhelmed, just stressed out, totally bursting at the seams with something you desperately needed to say, but you forced yourself to stay quiet? Yeah, we've all been there, right? It feels like a very modern kind of anxiety. But, as we're going to see in this explainer, the author of this text experienced this exact same psychological pressure cooker thousands of years ago. Let's look at how he handled it.
That brings us to part one of our breakdown, the pressure of silence and the resulting internal tension.
Let's ground ourselves in the actual source text we're analyzing today, specifically the English Standard Version of Psalm 39. Notice how it's addressed. It says, "To the choirmaster, to Jeduthun," and it's explicitly identified as a Psalm of David. Now this tells us right out of the gate that this wasn't just some private, locked-away journal entry. No, it was actually intended to be sung, to be shared publicly, and led by a specific choirmaster. It was a highly organized, structured expression of what was essentially a very personal crisis.
And this sequence brilliantly illustrates the escalating tension he felt. It's like watching a pot boil over. He starts by saying he's going to guard his ways and muzzle his mouth while the wicked are present. So he's totally mute, totally silent. But holding his peace doesn't work at all. His distress only grows worse. And this actually triggers a physical reaction. He says his heart became hot within him. As he muses, the fire burns. The internal pressure just keeps building and building until it's completely unbearable. And then, finally, the muzzle breaks, and he speaks.
And that exact breaking point leads us right into part two, confronting our mortality and the fleeting nature of life.
Now what's truly fascinating here is the totally unexpected direction his outburst takes. You'd probably expect a guy whose heart was literally burning with frustration to open his mouth and just start cursing the people stressing him out, right? But he doesn't. Instead, his shattered silence results in this desperate, profound plea to understand his own mortality. He asks the divine to make him know his end, to understand the measure of his days, and to really truly grasp how fleeting he is. He's not looking for revenge. He's seeking perspective.
So the crucial point to look at is the visual metaphor he uses to wrap his head around this. He says, "Behold, you have made my days a few handbreadths." Now, if you aren't familiar, a handbreadth is an ancient unit of measurement. It's literally just the width of 4 fingers across the palm. That's it. It's incredibly small. The author is demonstrating that when compared to the divine, his entire lifetime is reduced to almost nothing. It's a really powerful, just incredibly humbling image.
And he follows up that visual measurement with this absolutely haunting realization. Surely all mankind stands as a mere breath. And notice that word at the very end, Selah. In ancient texts, this is widely understood to mean a musical or poetic pause. So let's actually honor that for a second here. Let that sink in. A mere breath. Here 1 second, totally dissipating the next.
That incredibly sobering thought brings us into part 3, the chasing of shadows and the futility of turmoil. Because think about it, if our lives are literally just a few handbreadths long, what does that mean for how we spend our energy?
Well, this sets up a stark contrast. The text says a man goes about as a shadow and that people are in turmoil surely for nothing. We run around frantically, completely stressed out, essentially just casting shadows. But look at the practical example he gives of this futile turmoil. He says a man heaps up wealth, right? But he absolutely does not know who's going to gather it when he's gone. Because his life is a mere breath, his obsessive materialism and his constant wealth accumulation are ultimately pointless.
Realizing the absolute futility of chasing those shadows forces a major pivot. So let's look at part 4, Finding Hope in Distress, a conscious pivot.
This right here is the absolute psychological turning point of the entire text. He asks, "And now, O Lord, for what do I wait?" Which of course is a rhetorical question. He's just established that waiting around for earthly wealth or waiting for vindication from his enemies is basically like a shadow chasing the wind. It's totally futile. So what does he do? He consciously and deliberately shifts his entire framework. He says, "My hope is in you." He takes his fleeting, incredibly short life, and he anchors it to the eternal.
And you can see that once he anchors his hope, his whole tone changes. He moves away from that broad philosophical despair and goes straight into some very direct, very personal pleas. He asks to be delivered from his own transgressions. He begs not to be made the scorn of the fool. Acknowledging his own deep suffering, he asks God to remove your stroke from me, noting that he is just completely spent. And he finishes this section with an earnest, heartfelt plea for connection. Hear my prayer, hold not your peace at my tears.
To really hammer home his fragility during this discipline, the author brings in another brilliant piece of imagery. He says that when a man is rebuked for sin, you consume like a moth what is dear to him. Just think about a moth for a second. It's silent, it works completely in the dark, and it slowly, quietly eats away at the fabric of something valuable until it just falls apart. It's a really powerful illustration of how fragile our earthly treasures and honestly our own constitutions really are. And right after this striking imagery, the text gives us another salat, another deliberate pause to just let the reality of that extreme fragility sink in.
That deep, profound sense of fragility leads us right into our final section, Part 5, A Sojourner's Final Plea and Accepting Our Place.
Look at the language he uses to describe his identity at this point. He doesn't call himself an owner or a conqueror or some permanent resident. No, he says, "For I am a sojourner with you, a guest." A sojourner is just someone who resides temporarily in a place. He is fully, completely embracing the brevity of life we discussed earlier. He realizes he's just passing through, exactly like all his ancestors did before him.
And that very realization brings us to the final, incredibly poignant verse of this text. He asks the divine, "Look away from me, that I may smile again, before I depart and am no more." I mean, it's almost startling, isn't it? After pleading for God to hear his prayer and see his tears, he's now asking for the heavy gaze of divine discipline to be lifted, just for a moment. It reveals this deeply, deeply human desire for just a brief moment of joy, a chance to simply smile again before facing the inevitable end of his earthly sojourn.
Which ultimately brings us right back to you and me. The author of Psalm 39 went from this burning, suppressed anxiety to a profound realization that his life was a mere handbreadth, and he ultimately found his hope in the divine rather than in the futile accumulation of shadows. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. Knowing that your time here is a breath, just a temporary stay as a guest, how are you measuring the fleeting days of your own life?